I apologize for the delay. I have something I want to ask you. Have you ever put yourself in the middle of nowhere, wanting to see what is behind those dense trees? What is lurking inside that old building that has been dead and forgotten for years? Have you ever gone so far that you can't bring yourself to turn back? You should have. When I was a kid, my dad moved my brother and I into this really old 2-story house. I'm talking 100 years old or older. The house was in the middle of nowhere by some farmland. The house was falling apart and everything was constantly breaking. We didn't have any neighbors, and eventually, after trying to make that place work for us for about a year or so, we moved out. About 20 years later, I drove out to the road with my buddy. There was nothing left in that area. No houses, nothing. The road that the house was on was fenced off. We pulled over and hopped the fence. I really wanted to see that house again, and the idea of exploring it sounded cool. We walked down the road, which was completely overgrown with weeds, and you couldn't even tell that it had once been a road. When we got to the house, it was a sight straight out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was there, still standing. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever laid eyes on. Weeds were growing all around it, and it clearly had been abandoned for years. My buddy was keen on exploring it, but I changed my mind upon seeing it. Creepy memories returned, and I'm telling you, the house looked very uninviting. Regardless, with some encouragement, we walked over to it and tried opening the front door. It opened, but not easily. Broken glass was all over the floor in the foyer, and the door was struggling to open over some of the debris. We got it open enough to gain entry, and when I looked around the place, I got shivers. It was furnished. There was a sofa, chairs, a table in the dining room. It was so eerie. There were toys laying around the living room, and the weirdest thing, we saw 2 of those little gates that you set up in hallways or doorways in order to keep small children from entering certain areas. They were both set up on the bottom step of the stairs, as if meant to keep someone from going upstairs or someone from coming down. I had no desire to go up to the second floor, but my buddy lifted his legs one at a time over the small gates and started up the steps. I stood at the bottom and watched him ascend. Each step on the old wooden stairs would creak and bend. When he was about halfway up the stairs, we both heard what sounded like an animal. The sounds came from upstairs, and it sounded like the animal had just woken up. We heard it gasp and snarl and then start walking somewhere up there. My buddy turned around very slowly, and the look on his face was terror. This didn't sound like a dog or any other animal that could be non-threatening. He took a step down, and the wood creaked. He froze, and his eyes closed as if he knew the animal had heard him. The footsteps of the animal stopped, and then suddenly we heard whatever it was running in the direction of the staircase. My buddy slammed his feet fast down the steps, jumped over the fences, and ran into me. We both fell, but got up and bolted out the front door. Just before we got up and turned from the ground, I saw a glimpse of something at the top of the stairs. It was very big and dark. We ran as fast as we could through the weeds and back to the road. Out of breath, we both looked at each other with serious, "What the hell just happened?" faces. We made it back to the car and sped the hell out of there. Going there wasn't the best idea I ever had. I'm going to tell this story for my grandpa, since he is no longer with us. He told me a long time ago that he was living in Hawaii, and one weekend day he was at the beach with some of his friends and a group of girls. He said they were all swimming and having a great time, and that he and a pretty girl had hit it off and went for a walk down the beach. The stretch of beach was terribly long, according to my grandpa, and they walked all the way down the beach until nobody else was in sight, and they eventually had to stop walking on the sand when they hit some huge rocks. My grandpa says they swam out into the water and around the rocks and were amazed and excited to see a hidden area on the other side of them. They swam over to the sand behind the rocks and kept walking. The way my grandpa put it, they were walking and saw a person laying in the sand. Him and the girl both knew right away, somehow, that the person was dead. The girl became scared and wanted to turn back, but my grandpa kept going and she followed. He says that when they got to the person, they were horrified to see it was a woman covered in blood who had looked to have been stabbed many times. He says at that time the woman vomited, and here's the weirdest part of the story. I'm not sure why he told me this, but he said he briefly thought that this would be a damn good place to stab someone to death, and that it was a good thing he didn't have any knives on hand. He laughed after telling me that, and then said they just walked away and told their friends. He never told the police department, and isn't sure that any of them did. My girlfriend and I took a trip down to an old river she used to play at when she was young. We drove about 70 miles out into the forest on a pretty desolate road to get there. I couldn't believe she remembered the way, because we had to take several turns and drive for many miles down twisted and seemingly abandoned roads. Eventually, she pointed out a trail that led down to the river where people would often meet and swim together. We left the car there and hiked down a windy path down to the river. I knew nobody would be there, and she was disappointed when I turned out to be right. The river was calm, and I could see how it used to be a cool spot to hang out. We sat on a rock and smoked while looking around. Not very far away, there was an old rope bridge that had collapsed, and my girl said she used to watch older kids and adults jump off the middle of it into the river. It wasn't long before we started to relax, and we both laid back on the big rock and started to doze off. It was very peaceful and would have been an awesome place to take a nap before the long drive home. I say it would have been because we both almost died of fright when somebody yelled, "Hello!" right next to us. At least, it sounded like it was right next to us. We both were looking around everywhere and didn't see anyone. The voice was a man's voice. We quickly figured out that whoever it was hiding, and we knew it was time to leave. We hiked back up the trail to the car. When we got inside, I started the engine, and my girlfriend gasped. I turned to see what she did, and I stomped the gas pedal when I saw a man standing at the top of the trail. My mother got married last year up in the mountains. It was a very nice wedding, and my mother and her new husband had decided to rent a huge cabin up in the mountains close to the church they got married in, and they had all the guests come over to celebrate that night. After a few hours of drinking, my stepsister and I, along with her boyfriend, decided to explore the woods behind the cabin. There was a steep incline behind the cabin that led into the woods, and the three of us had a hell of a time getting down it. My sister's boyfriend was the only one with a flashlight, and because we were all so drunk, we somehow didn't think it was necessary to bring more. When we reached the bottom of the incline, we began to walk forward into the trees. It was completely pitch black anywhere that the light was not shining, and being so drunk, I was having fun walking through the darkness, completely not expecting what happened next. We had split up, and I was now by myself, surrounded by darkness and trees. I stumbled in one direction, and then another, and then fell down. I sat up, alone, and then looked up into the trees. I could see the tops of them and the stars in the sky. My gaze was cut short when I heard footsteps approaching me. I looked in the direction of the twigs crunching below feet, but saw only the very slight figure of someone. I laughed and said to my sister, "You may need to carry me back." The person continued walking to me and then sat down in front of me. I smiled and then looked back up into the trees, but then I immediately dropped my gaze back down to the person while I realized that whoever was sitting right in front of me was not my sister or her boyfriend. I tried to focus my sight, but could only see the outline of this person and the whites of their eyes. A feeling of sobriety hit me, and I knew that I could possibly be in real danger. I looked at them while they did the same to me. Their gaze never left me, and after about 10 seconds, I stood up and began walking away. My drunk state returned, and walking efficiently was difficult. I kept turning around, expecting to see the stranger come at me, but I saw nothing, and after spinning in circles, trying to see anything, I saw a beam of light in the distance for a second and then disappear. It was the flashlight. It had to be. I started running towards where I'd seen it. I can't be sure, but as I ran, I thought I heard someone running behind me, but it might have just been my imagination because of my adrenaline. I saw the light again and stopped when I reached my sister's boyfriend. He laughed and asked where I went, and then I saw my sister stumbling behind him. I told them both, slurring my words, that there was somebody else out here. He laughed, but my sister drunkenly agreed to go back up to the cabin. We all made it back inside and were exhausted from climbing up that incline. I spent the night sleeping on the couch and was paranoid that whoever I saw down in the woods would try to come inside, and I kept looking out all the windows that were visible to me expecting to see the whites of their eyes again. I will start by saying that this story is true, and I will not exaggerate anything. My best friend Katie and I were exploring the abandoned industrial ship docks across town. Since we were born, they've been abandoned, and my parents have always just said that they weren't needed anymore, so they were just left to rot. There is a tall building standing next to the ship dock, and clear across town you can see the broken windows at the top. It looks very creepy, and it was only a matter of time before Katie and I checked it out. There were signs everywhere saying, "Do not trespass," and "private property." That didn't stop us one night. We waited for the sun to set, and armed with flashlights, we walked the 7 blocks over to the fishing docks. The plan was to run across the street as fast as possible and hop the fences guarding the property before anybody could drive by and see us. That plan succeeded, and we both made it over fast. We sprinted down the old dock over to the building, and to our surprise, the door wasn't locked in any way. It just opened right up for us. The first room we saw had nothing in it, and we went up the staircase to the second floor. On this floor, there were papers scattered everywhere, and I picked up one to read it. It looked like an old manifest or something like that of the ships that would pass through many years ago. Katie waited for me, and we both ran up to the 3rd floor. The door was unlocked just like the first 2, and we went inside. There was nothing in there except for more papers. We continued up to the 4th floor, and when we turned the doorknob expecting it to open, it didn't. It was locked. We shook it hard, but it didn't budge. Suddenly, we thought we heard something inside the room. There was a gap under the door between it and the top step of the stairs, and we both got down to peek inside with our lights. When we did this, we were shocked to see a pair of shoes walk over to the door and hit the door with something hard. Katie and I flew down the stairs, and when we got to the 2nd floor, the door we entered in was now closed, but not just closed, locked. Then, we heard a door open from upstairs, hyperventilating as we heard footsteps coming down the stairs. The door finally opened. We flew down the remainder of the stairs to the ground level, and when we were back outside, we ran over to the adjacent building and hid behind the corner. I peeked around it, and nobody came out that door. We waited there for a few minutes, and then left. We both have told this story, and we don't have any explanation or clue how that door locked us inside for the 20 seconds that it did. I've never looked at the docks or that building the same. It gives me the creeps to think that somebody is up there